welcome you all here to Sherburne Music Theater Society's presentation of Tales to Chill the Soul, a dramatic reading of two short stories appropriate for the Halloween season. We want to thank the Sherburne Public Library and its wonderful staff for hosting the event here today. We also want to recognize that this project is funded by the Earlville Opera House's Arts in the Community Grants Program, made possible by the New York State Legislature with support of the Office of the Governor and administered by the New York State Council on the Arts. The first tale that we are going to present tonight is Young Goodman Brown. This was written in 1835 by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Born in 1804 in Salem, Massachusetts, Hawthorne was a novelist and short story writer whose works often reflected on morality, religion, and the nature of evil. Our story takes place in 17th century Salem Village, where young Goodman Brown is about to take an evening walk into the darkness of the forest and discover the darkness that lies within the human soul.
Young Goodman Brown came forth at sunset into the street of Salem Village, but put his head back after crossing the threshold to exchange a parting kiss with his young wife. And Faith, as the wife was aptly named, thrust her own pretty head into the street, letting the wind play with the pink ribbons of her cap, while she called to Goodman Brown, "Dearest heart, prithee, put off your journey until sunrise, and sleep in your own bed tonight. A lone woman is troubled with such dreams and such thoughts that she's afeard of herself sometimes. Pray tarry with me this night, dear husband, of all nights in this year."
My love and my faith, of all the nights in the year, this one night must I tarry away from thee. My journey, as thou callest it, forth and back again must needs be done twixt now and sunrise. What, my sweet pretty wife, dost thou doubt me already, and we but 3 months married?
Oh, then God bless you, and may you find all well when you come back.
Amen. Say thy prayers, dear Faith, and go to bed at dusk, and no harm will come to thee.
So they parted, and the young man pursued his way until, being about to turn the corner by the meeting house, he looked back and saw the head of Faith still peeping after him with a melancholy air in spite of her pink ribbons.
Poor little Faith, what a wretch am I to leave her on such an errand. She talks of dreams, too. Methought as she spoke, there was a trouble in her face, as if a dream had warned her of the work that was to be done tonight. But no, 'twould kill her to think it. Well, she's a blessed angel on earth, and after this one night, I'll cling to her skirts and I'll follow her to heaven.
With this excellent resolve for the future, Goodman Brown felt himself justified in making more haste on his present evil purpose. He had taken a dreary road, darkened by all the gloomiest trees of the forest, which barely stood aside to let the narrow path creep through, and closed immediately behind. It was all as lonely as could be, and there is this peculiarity in such a solitude that the traveler knows not who may be concealed by the innumerable trunks and the thick boughs overhead, so that with lonely footsteps he may yet be passing through an unseen multitude.
There may be a devilish Indian behind every tree. What if the devil himself should be at my very elbow?
His head being turned back, he passed a crook of the road, and looking forward again, beheld the figure of a man, in grave and decent attire, seated at the foot of an old tree. He arose at Goodman Brown's approach, and walked onward, side by side with him.
"You are late, Goodman Brown. The clock of the Old South was striking as I came through Boston, and that is full 15 minutes agone."
Faith kept me back a while.
It was now deep dusk in the forest, and deepest in that part of where these two were journeying. As nearly as could be discerned, the second traveler was about 50 years old, apparently in the same rank of life as Goodman Brown, and bearing a considerable resemblance to him, though perhaps more in expression than features. Still, they might have been taken for father and son, and yet, though the elder person was as simply clad as the younger, and as simple in manner too, he had an indescribable air of one who knew the world, and would not have felt abashed at the governor's dinner table, or in King William's court, were it possible that his affairs should call him thither. But the only thing about him that could be fixed upon as remarkable was his staff, which bore the likeness of a great black snake, so curiously wrought that it might almost have been seen to twist and wriggle itself like a living serpent. This, of course, must have been an ocular deception assisted by the uncertain light.
Come, Goodman Brown, this is a dull pace for the beginning of a journey. Take my staff if you are so soon weary.
Friend, having kept covenant by meeting thee here, it is my purpose now to return whence I came. I have scruples touching the matter thou wouldst.
Sayest thou so? Let us walk on nevertheless, reasoning as we go, and if I convince thee not, thou shalt turn back. We are but a little way in the forest yet.
Too far, too far. My father never went into the woods on such an errand, nor his father before him. We have been a race of honest men and good Christians since the days of the martyrs. And shall I be the first of the name Brown ever to took this path and kept...
Such company thou wouldst say? Well said, Goodman Brown. I have been as well acquainted with your family as with ever a one among the Puritans, and that's no trifle to say. I helped your grandfather, the constable, when he lashed the Quaker woman so smartly through the streets of Salem. And it was I that brought your father a pitch pine knot, kindled at my own hearth, to set fire to an Indian village in King Philip's war. They were my good friends, both. And many a pleasant walk have we had along this path, and returned merrily after midnight. I would be fain friends with you for their sake.
If it be as thou sayest, I marvel they never spoke of these matters. Or verily I marvel not, seeing that the least rumor of the sort would have driven them from New England. We are a people of prayer and good works to boot, and abide no such wickedness.
Wickedness or not, I have a very general acquaintance here in New England. The deacons of many a church have drunk the communion wine with me. The selectmen of divers towns make me their chairman, and a majority of the great and general court are firm supporters of my interest. The governor and I, too, but these are state secrets.
Can this be so? Howbeit, I have nothing to do with the governor and the council. They have their own ways, and are no rule for a simple husbandman like me. But were I to go with thee, how should I meet the eye of that good old man, our minister at Salem Village? Oh, his voice would make me tremble, both Sabbath day and lecture day.
Well, go on, Goodman Brown, go on. But prithee, don't kill me with laughing.
Well, then, to end the matter at once, there is my wife, Faith. It would break her little heart, and I'd rather break my own.
Nay, if that be the case, even go thy ways, Goodman Brown. I would not, for 20 old women like the one hobbling before us, that Faith should go or come to any harm.
As he spoke, the traveler pointed his twisted staff at a female figure on the path, in whom Goodman Brown recognized a very pious and exemplary dame who had taught him his catechism in youth, and was still his moral and spiritual adviser, jointly with the minister and Deacon Gookin.
A marvel truly that Goody Cloyce should be so far in the wilderness at nightfall. But with your leave, friend, I shall take a cut through the woods, until we have left this Christian woman behind. Being a stranger to you, she might ask whom I was consorting with and whither I was going.
Be it so. Betake you to the woods, and let me keep the path.
Accordingly, the young man turned aside, but took care to watch his companion, who advanced softly along the road, until he had come within a staff's length of the old dame. She, meanwhile, was making the best of her way with singular speed for so aged a woman, and mumbling some indistinct words, a prayer, doubtless, as she went. The traveler put forth his staff and touched her withered neck with what seemed the serpent's tail, and the aged woman cried out, "The devil!"
Then Goody Close knows her old friend?
"Oh, forsooth! And is it your worship indeed? Yea, truly it is, and in the very image of my old gossip, Goodman Brown, the grandfather of the silly fellow that now is. But would your worship believe it? Ha! My broomstick hath strangely disappeared, stolen, as I suspect, by that unhanged witch, Goody Cory, and that too when I was all anointed with the juice of smallage and cinquefoil and wolfsbane."
Mingled with fine wheat and the fat of a newborn babe.
"Oh, your worship knows the recipe. So, as I was saying, being all ready for the meeting, and no horse to ride on, I made up my mind to foot it. For they tell me there is a nice young man to be taken into communion tonight. But now your good worship will lend me your arm, and we shall be there in a twinkling."
That can hardly be. I may not spare you my arm, Goody Close, but here is my staff, if you will.
So saying, he threw it down at her feet, where, perhaps, it assumed life, being one of the rods which its owner had formerly lent to the Egyptian magi. Of this fact, however, Goodman Brown could not take cognizance. He had cast up his eyes in astonishment, and looking down again, beheld neither Goody Cloyse nor the serpentine staff, but his fellow traveler alone, who waited for him as calmly as if nothing had happened.
That old woman taught me my catechism.
They continued to walk onward, while the elder traveler exhorted his companion to make good speed and persevere in the path, discoursing so aptly that his arguments seemed rather to spring up in the bosom of his auditor than to be suggested by himself. As they went, he plucked a branch of maple to serve as a walking stick, and began to strip of the twigs and little boughs which were wet with evening dew. The moment his fingers touched them, they became strangely withered and dried up, as with a week's sunshine. Thus the pair proceeded, at a good free pace, until suddenly, in a gloomy hollow of the road, Goodman Brown sat himself down on the stump of a tree and refused to go any farther.
Friend, my mind is made up. Not another step will I budge on this errand. What if that wretched old woman do choose to go to the devil when I thought she was going to heaven? Is that any reason why I should quit my dear faith and go after her?
You will think better of this by and by. Sit here and rest yourself a while, and when you feel like moving again, there is my staff to help you along.
Without more words, he threw his companion the maple stick, and was as speedily out of sight as if he had vanished into the deepening gloom. The young man sat a few moments by the roadside, applauding himself greatly, and thinking with how clear a conscience he should meet the minister in his morning walk, nor shrink from the eye of the good old Deacon Gookin. And what calm sleep would be his that very night, which was to have been spent so wickedly, but purely and sweetly now, in the arms of faith. Amidst these pleasant and praiseworthy meditations, Goodman Brown heard the tramp of horses along the road, and deemed it advisable to conceal himself within the verge of the forest. Conscious of the guilty purpose that had brought him thither, though now so happily turned from it. On came the hoof tramps and the voices of the riders, two grave old voices conversing soberly as they drew near. These mingled sounds appeared to pass along the road, within a few yards of the young man's hiding place, but owing, doubtless, to the depth of the gloom at that particular spot, neither the travelers nor their steeds were visible. Though their figures brushed the small boughs by the wayside, it could not be seen that they intercepted, even for a moment, the faint gleam from the strip of the bright sky athwart which they must have passed. Goodman Brown alternately crouched and stood up on tiptoe, pulling aside the branches and thrusting forth his head as far as he durst, without discerning so much as a shadow. It vexed him more, because he could have sworn, were such a thing possible, that he recognized the voices of the minister and Deacon Gookin, jogging along quietly, as they were wont to do, when bound to some ordination or ecclesiastical council, while yet within hearing one of the riders stopped to pluck a switch.
Well, the two, Reverend Sir, I'd rather miss an ordination dinner than tonight's meeting. They tell me some of our community are to be here from Falmouth and beyond, and others from Connecticut and Rhode Island, besides several of the Indian powwows, who, after their fashion, know almost as much deviltry as the best of us. Moreover, there is a goodly young woman to be taken into communion, and so I say, good minister, spur up, or we shall be late. Nothing can be done, we know, until I get on the ground.
The hoofs clattered again, and the voices, talking so strangely in the empty air, passed on through the forest, where no church had ever been gathered, no solitary Christian prayed. Whither then could these holy men be journeying so deep into the heathen wilderness? Young Goodman Brown caught hold of a tree for support, being ready to sink down to the ground, faint and overburthened with the heavy sickness of his heart. He looked up to the sky, doubting whether there really was a heaven above him, yet there was the blue arch and the stars brightening in it.
With heaven above and faith below, I will yet stand firm against the devil.
While he still gazed upward into the deep arch of the firmament, he had lifted his hands to pray. A cloud, though no wind was stirring, hurried across the zenith and hid the brightening stars. The blue sky was still visible, except directly overhead, where this black mass of cloud was sweeping swiftly northward. Aloft in the air, as if from the depths of the cloud, came a confused and doubtful sound of voices. Once the listener fancied that he could distinguish the accent of townspeople of his own, men and women both pious and ungodly, many of whom he had met at the communion table, and had seen others rioting at the tavern. The next moment, so indistinct were the sounds, he doubted whether he had heard aught but the murmur of the old forest whispering without the wind. Then came a stronger swell of those familiar tones, heard daily in the sunshine at Salem Village, but never, until now, from a cloud of night. There was one voice, of a young woman, uttering lamentations, yet with an uncertain sorrow, and entreating for some favor which, perhaps, it would grieve her to obtain. And all the unseen multitude, both saints and sinners, seemed to encourage her onward.
Faith!
And the echoes of the forest mocked him, crying, Faith! Faith! As if bewildered wretches were seeking her all through the wilderness. The cry of grief, rage, and terror was yet piercing the night when the unhappy husband held his breath for a response. There was a scream, drowned immediately in a louder murmur of voices, fading into far-off laughter, as the dark cloud swept away, leaving the clear and silent sky above Goodman Brown. But something fluttered lightly down through the air and caught on a branch of a tree. The young man seized it and beheld a pink ribbon.
My faith is gone. There is no good on earth, and sin is but a name. Come, devil, for to thee this world is given.
And maddened with despair, so that he laughed loud and long, did Goodman Brown grasp his staff and set forth again, at such a rate that he seemed to fly along the forest path, rather than to walk or run. The road grew wilder and drearier, and more faintly traced, and vanished at length, leaving him in the heart of the dark wilderness, still rushing onward, with the instinct that guides mortal man to evil. The whole forest was peopled with frightful sounds, the creaking of the trees, the howling of the wild beasts, and the yell of the Indians, while sometimes the wind tolled like a distant church bell, and sometimes gave a broad roar around the traveler as if all nature were laughing him to scorn. But he was himself the chief horror of the scene, and shrank not from its other horrors.
Ha 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 ha! Let us hear which will laugh loudest. Think not to frighten me with your deviltry. Come witch, come wizard, come Indian powwow, come devil himself. And here comes Goodman Brown. You may as well fear him as he fear you.
In truth, all through the haunted forest, there could be nothing more frightful than the figure of Goodman Brown. On he flew among the black pines, brandishing his staff with frenzied gestures, now giving vent to an inspiration of horrid blasphemy, and now shouting forth such laughter as set all the echoes of the forest laughing like demons around him. The fiend in his own shape is less hideous than when he rages in the breast of man. Thus sped the demoniac on his course until, quivering among the trees, he saw a red light before him, as when he felled trunks and branches of a clearing have been set on fire and throw up their lurid blaze against the sky at the hour of midnight. He paused in a lull of the tempest that had driven him onward, and heard the swell of what seemed a hymn. Rolling solemnly from a distance, with the weight of many voices, he knew the tune. It was a familiar one in the choir of the village meeting house. The verse died heavily away and was lengthened by a chorus, not of human voices, but of all the sounds of the benighted wilderness, pealing in awful harmony together. Goodman Brown cried out, and his cry was lost to his own ear by its unison with the cry of the desert. In the interval of silence, he stole forward until the light glared full upon his eyes. At one extremity of an open space, hemmed in by the dark wall of the forest, rose a rock, bearing some rude natural resemblance either to an altar or a pulpit, and surrounded by 4 blazing pines, their tops aflame, their stems untouched, like candles at an evening meeting. The mass of foliage that had overgrown the summit of the rock was all on fire, blazing high into the night and fitfully illuminating the whole field. Each pendant twig and leafy festoon was in blaze. As the red light arose and fell, a numerous congregation alternately shone forth, then disappeared in shadow, and again grew, as it were, out of the darkness, peopling the heart of the solitary woods at once.
A grave and dark-clad company.
In truth, they were such. Among them, quivering to and fro between gloom and splendor, appeared faces that would be seen the next day at the council board of the province, and others which Sabbath after Sabbath looked devoutly heavenward and benightly over the crowded pews from the holiest pulpits in the land. Some affirmed that the lady of the governor was there. At least there were high dames well known for her and wives of honored husbands and widows, a great multitude, and ancient maidens, and all of excellent repute, and fair young girls who trembled lest their mother should espy them. Either the sudden gleams of light flashing over the obscure field bedazzled Goodman Brown, or he recognized a score of the church members of Salem Village, famous for their especial sanctity. Good old Deacon Gookin had arrived, and waited at the skirts of that venerable saint, his reverend pastor. But irreverently consorting with these grave, reputable, and pious people, these elders of the church, these chaste dames and dewy virgins, there were men of dissolute lives and women of spotted fame, wretches given over to all mean and filthy vice, and suspected even of horrid crimes. It was strange to see that the good shrank not from the wicked, nor were the sinners abashed by the saints. Scattered also among their pale-faced enemies were the Indian priests or powwows, who had often scarred their native forest with more hideous incantations than any known to English witchcraft.
But where is faith?
Another verse of the hymn arose, a slow and mournful strain, such as the pious love, but joined to words which expressed all that our nature can conceive of sin, and darkly hinted at far more. unfathomable to mere mortals is the lore of fiends. Verse after verse was sung, and still the chorus of the desert swelled between, like the deepest tone of a mighty organ. And with the final peal of that dreadful anthem, there came a sound, as if the roaring wind and the rushing streams, the howling beasts, and every other voice of the unconverted wilderness were mingling and according with the voice of guilty man in homage to the Prince of all. The 4 blazing pines threw up a loftier flame, and obscurely discovered shapes and visages of horror on the smoke wreaths above the impious assembly. At the same moment, the fire on the rock shot redly forth and formed a glowing arch above its base, where now appeared a figure. With reverence it be spoken, the figure bore no slight similitude, both in garb and manner, to some grave divine of the New England churches.
Bring forth the converts.
At the word, Goodman Brown stepped forth from the shadow of the trees and approached the congregation, with whom he felt a loathful brotherhood. By the sympathy of all that was wicked in his heart, he could have well nigh sworn that the shape of his own dead father beckoned him to advance, looking downward from a smoke wreath, while a woman, with dim features of despair, threw out her hand to warn him back. Was it his mother? But he had no power to retreat one step, nor to resist, even in thought, when the minister and good old Deacon Gookin seized his arms and led him to the blazing rock. Thither came also the slender form of a veiled female, led between Goody Cloyce, that pious teacher of the catechism, and Martha Carrier, who had received the devil's promise to be queen of hell. A rampant hag was she, and there stood the proselytes beneath the canopy of fire.
Welcome, my children, to the communion of your race. Ye have found thus young your nature and your destiny. My children, look behind you.
They turned, and flashing forth, as it were, in a sheet of flame, the fiend worshippers were seen. The smile of welcome gleamed darkly on every visage.
There are all whom ye have reverenced from youth. Ye deemed them holier than yourselves, and shrank from your own sin, contrasting it with their lives of righteousness and prayerful aspirations heavenward. Yet here are they all in my worshiping community. This night it shall be granted you to know their secret deeds, how hoary bearded elders of the church have whispered wanton words to the young maids of their households, how many a woman eager for widow's weeds has given her husband a drink at bedtime, and let him sleep his last sleep in her bosom. How beardless youth have made haste to inherit their father's wealth, and how fair damsels, blush not, sweet ones, have dug little graves in the garden, and bidden me, the sole guest, to an infant's funeral. By the sympathy of your human hearts for sin, ye shall scent out all the places, whether in church, bedchamber, street, field, or forest, where crime has been committed, and shall exult to behold the whole earth one stain of guilt, one mighty blood spot. Far more than this, it shall be yours to penetrate in every bosom the deep mystery of sin, the fountain of all wicked arts, and which inexhaustibly supplies more evil impulses than human power, than my power at its utmost can make manifest in deeds. And now, my children, look upon each other.
They did so, and by the blaze of the hell-kindled torches, the wretched man beheld his faith, and the wife her husband, trembling before that unhallowed altar.
Lo, there ye stand, my children. Depending upon one another's hearts, ye had still hoped that virtue were not all a dream. Now are ye undeceived. Evil is the nature of mankind, Evil must be your only happiness. Welcome again, my children, to the communion of your race.
Welcome, repeated the fiend worshippers in one cry of despair and triumph, and there they stood, the only pair, as it seemed, who were yet hesitating on the verge of wickedness. In the dark world, a basin was hollowed, naturally in the rock. Did it contain water, reddened by the lurid light? Or was it blood? Or perchance a liquid flame? Herein did the shape of evil dip his hand and prepare to lay the mark of baptism upon their foreheads, that they might be partakers of the mystery of sin, more conscious of the secret guilt of others, both in deed and thought, than they could now be of their own. The husband cast one look at his pale wife, and faith at him. What polluted wretches would the next glance show them to each other, shuddering alike at what they disclosed and what they saw?
Faith, faith, look up to heaven and resist the wicked one.
Whether faith obeyed, he knew not. Hardly had he spoken when he found himself amid calm night and solitude, listening to a roar of the wind which died heavily away through the forest. He staggered against the rock and felt it chill and damp, while a hanging twig that had been on fire bespeckled his cheek with the coldest of dew. The next morning, young Goodman Brown came slowly into the street of Salem Village, staring around him like a bewildered man. The good old minister was taking a walk along the graveyard to get an appetite for breakfast and meditate his sermon, and bestowed a blessing as he passed on Goodman Brown. He shrank from the venerable saint, as if to avoid an anathema. Old Deacon Gooten was at domestic worship, and the holy words of his prayer were heard through an open window. Goody Cloyce, that excellent old Christian, stood in the early sunshine at her own lattice, catechizing a little girl who had brought her a pint of morning's milk. Goodman Brown snatched away the child as if from the grasp of the fiend himself. Turning the corner by the meeting house, he spied the head of Faith, with the pink ribbons, gazing anxiously forth, and bursting into such joy at the sight of him that she skipped along the street and almost kissed her husband before the whole entire village. But Goodman Brown looked sternly and sadly into her face and passed on without a greeting. Had Goodman Brown fallen asleep in the forest and only dreamed a wild dream of witch meeting? Be it so, if you will, but alas, it was a dream of evil omen for young Goodman Brown, a stern, sad, darkly meditative, and distrustful, if not a desperate man, did he become from the night of that fearful dream. On the Sabbath day, when the congregation were singing a holy psalm, he could not listen, because an anthem of sin rushed loudly upon his ear and drowned all the blessed strain. When the minister spoke from the pulpit with power and fervent eloquence, and with his hand upon the open Bible, of that secret truths of our religion, and of saint-like lives and triumphant deaths, of the future bliss or misery unutterable, then did Goodman Brown turn pale, dreading lest the roof should thunder down upon the gray blasphemer and his hearers. Often awakening suddenly at midnight, he shrank from the bosom of faith, and at morning or eventide, when the family knelt down at prayer, he scowled and muttered to himself, and gazed sternly at his wife, and turned away. And when he had lived long and was borne to his grave, a hoary corpse, followed by Faith, an aged woman, and children and grandchildren, a goodly procession, besides neighbors not a few, they carved no hopeful verse upon his tombstone, for his dying hour was gloom.
Our second story tonight is The Moonlit Road by Ambrose Bierce. Born in 1842, Bierce was an American short story writer, a journalist, a poet, and Civil War veteran. During his lifetime, Bierce was perhaps better known as a journalist than as a fiction writer, even though his writing was prolific, having penned 249 short stories, many portraying very realistically the terrible things he had seen as a soldier. In addition to these war stories, however, Bierce also wrote many tales of the supernatural and what would later become known as weird fiction. Some of Bierce's works influenced the early weird fiction writer Robert W. Chambers, who in turn went on to influence H.P. Lovecraft and thus much of modern horror fiction. The story you hear tonight, The Moonlit Road, was first published in 1894. It is a story told in 3 parts, beginning now with the statement of Joel Hetman, Jr.
I am the most unfortunate of men. Rich, respected, fairly well educated, and of sound health, with many other advantages usually valued by those having them and coveted by those who have them not. I sometimes think that I should be less unhappy if they had been denied me, for then the contrast between my outer and my inner life would not be continually demanding a painful attention. In the stress of privation and the need of effort, I might sometimes forget the somber secret, ever baffling the conjecture that it compels. I am the only child of Joel and Julia Hetman. The one was a well-to-do country gentleman, the other a beautiful and accomplished woman, to whom he was passionately attached, with what I now know to have been a jealous and exacting devotion. The family home was a few miles from Nashville, Tennessee, a large, irregularly built dwelling of no particular order of architecture, a little way off the road in a park of trees and shrubbery. At the time of which I write, I was 19 years old, a student at Yale. One day I received a telegram from my father of such urgency that in compliance with its unexplained demand, I left at once for home. At the railway station in Nashville, a distant relative awaited me to apprise me of the reason for my recall. My mother had been barbarously murdered. Why and by whom, none could conjecture. But the circumstances were these. My father had gone to Nashville, intending to return the next afternoon. Something prevented his accomplishing the business in hand, so he returned on the same night, arriving just before dawn. In his testimony before the coroner, he explained that having no latchkey and not caring to disturb the sleeping servants, he had, with no clearly defined intention, gone round to the rear of the house. As he turned an angle of the building, he heard a sound as of a door gently closed, and saw in the darkness, indistinctly, the figure of a man, which instantly disappeared among the trees of the lawn. A hasty pursuit and brief search of the grounds, in the belief that the trespasser was someone secretly visiting a servant, proving fruitless, he entered the unlocked door and mounted the stair to my mother's chamber. Its door was open, and stepping into the black darkness, he fell headlong over some heavy object on the floor. I may spare myself the details. It was my poor mother, dead of strangulation by human hands. Nothing had been taken from the house. The servants had heard no sound, and excepting those terrible finger marks upon the dead woman's throat, dear God, that I might forget them, no trace of the assassin was ever found. I gave up my studies and remained with my father, who naturally was greatly changed. Always of a sedate, taciturn disposition, he now fell into so deep a dejection that nothing could hold his attention. Yet anything, a footfall, a sudden closing of a door, aroused in him a fitful interest. One might even call it an apprehension. At any small surprise of the senses, he would start visibly and sometimes turn pale, then relapse into a melancholy apathy deeper than before. I suppose he was what is called a nervous wreck. As to me, I was younger then than now. There is much in that. Youth is Gilead, in which the balm for every wound. Ah, that I might again dwell in that enchanted land, unacquainted with grief. I knew not how to appraise my bereavement. I could not rightly estimate the strength of the stroke. One night, a few months after the dreadful event, my father and I walked home from the city. The full moon was about 3 hours above the eastern horizon. The entire countryside had the solemn stillness of a summer night. Our footfalls and the ceaseless song of the katydids were the only sound aloof. Black shadows of bordering trees lay athwart the road, which, in the short recesses between, gleamed a ghostly white. As we approached the gate of our dwelling, whose front was in shadow, and which no light shone, my father suddenly stopped and clutched my arm, saying, hardly above his breath, God, what is that? I hear nothing, I replied. But see, he said, pointing along the road directly ahead. I said, nothing is there. Come, father, let us go in. You are ill. He had released my arm and was standing rigid and motionless in the center of the illuminated roadway, staring like one bereft of sense. His face in the moonlight showed a pallor and fixity inexpressibly distressing. I pulled gently at his sleeve, but he had forgotten my existence. Presently he began to retire backwards, step by step, never for an instant removing his eyes from what he saw, or thought he saw. I turned halfway round to follow, but stood irresolute. I do not recall any feeling of fear, unless a sudden chill was a physical manifestation. It seemed as if an icy wind had touched my face and enfolded my body from head to foot. I could feel the stir of it in my hair. At that moment, my attention was drawn to a light that suddenly streamed from an upper window of the house. One of the servants, awakened by some mysterious premonition of evil, who can say, and in obedience to that impulse that she was never able to name, had lit a lamp. When I turned to look for my father, he was gone. And in all the years that have passed, no whisper of his fate has come across the borderland of conjecture from the realm of the unknown.
I had retired early and fallen almost immediately into a peaceful sleep, from which I awoke with that indefinable sense of peril which is, I think, a common experience in that other earlier life. Of its unmeaning character, too. I was entirely persuaded, yet that did not banish it. My husband, Joel Hetman, was away from home. The servants slept in another part of the house, but these were familiar conditions. They had never before distressed me. Nevertheless, the strange terror grew so insupportable that, conquering my reluctance to move, I sat up and lit the lamp at my bedside. Contrary to my expectation, this gave me no relief. The light seemed rather an added danger, for I reflected that it would shine out under the door, disclosing my presence to whatever evil thing might lurk outside. You, that are still in the flesh, subject to the horrors of the imagination, think what a monstrous fear that must be which seeks in darkness security from malevolent existences of the night. That is to spring to close quarters with an unseen enemy, the strategy of despair. Extinguishing the lamp, I pulled the bed clothing above my head and lay trembling and silent, unable to shriek, forgetful to pray. In this pitiable state, I must have lain for what you call hours. With us, there is no hours, there is no time. And at last it came, a soft, irregular sound of footfalls on the stairs. They were slow, hesitant, uncertain, as of something that did not see its way. To my disordered reason, all the more terrifying for that, as the approach of some blind and mindless malevolence to which is no appeal. I even thought that I must have left the hall lamp burning, and the groping of this creature proved it a monster of the night. This was foolish and inconsistent with my previous dread of the light. But what would you have? Fear has no brains, it is an idiot. The dismal witness that it bears and the cowardly counsel that it whispers are unrelated. We know this well, we who have passed into the realm of terror, who have skulked in eternal dusk among the scenes of our former lives, invisible even to ourselves and one another, yet hiding forlorn in lonely places, yearning for speech with our loved ones, yet dumb and as fearful of them as they of us. Sometimes the disability is removed, the law suspended. By the deathless power of love or hate, we break the spell. We are seen by those whom we would warn, console, or punish. What form we seem to them we bear, we know not. We know only that we terrify even those whom we most wish to comfort and from whom we most crave tenderness and sympathy. Forgive, I pray you, this inconsequent digression by what was once a woman. You who consult us in this imperfect way, you do not understand. You ask foolish questions about things unknown and things forbidden. Much that we know and could impart in our speech is meaningless in yours. We must communicate with you through a stammering intelligence and that small fraction of our language that you yourselves can speak. You think that we are of another world. No, we have no knowledge of no world but yours. Though for us it holds no sunlight, no warmth, no music, no laughter, no song of birds, nor any companionship. Oh God, what a thing it is to be a ghost, cowering and shivering in an altered world, a prey to apprehension and despair. No, I did not die of fright. The thing turned and went away. I heard it go down the stairs, hurriedly, I thought, as if myself in sudden fear, and then I rose to call for help. Hardly had my shaking hand found the doorknob when, merciful heaven, I heard it returning. Its footfalls, as it remounted the stairs, were rapid, heavy, and loud. They shook the house. I fled to an angle of the wall and crouched upon the floor. I tried to pray. I tried to call the name of my dear husband. Then I heard the door thrown open. There was an interval of unconsciousness, and when I revived, I felt a strangling clutch upon my throat. I felt my arms feebly beating against something that bore me backward. I felt my tongue thrusting itself from between my teeth, and then I passed into this life. No, I have no knowledge of what it was. The sum of what we knew at death is the measure of what we know afterward of all that went before. Of this existence we know many things, but no new light falls upon any page of that. In memory is written all of it we can read. Here are no heights of truth overlooking the confused landscape of the dutiable domain. We still dwell in the valley of the shadow, lurk in its desolate places, peering from brambles and thickets at its mad, malign inhabitants. How should we have new knowledge of that fading past? What I am about to relate happened on a night. We know when it is night, for then you retire to your houses, and we can venture from our places of concealment to move unafraid about our old homes, to look in at the windows, even to enter and gaze upon your faces as you sleep. I had lingered long near the dwelling where I had been so cruelly changed to what I am, and we do while any that we love or hate remain. Vainly I had sought some method of manifestation, some way to make my continued existence and my great love and poignant pity understood by my husband and son. Always, if they slept, they would wake, or if in my desperation I dared approach them when they were awake, they would turn toward me with terrible eyes of the living, frightening me by the glances that I sought from the purpose that I had. On this night I had searched for them without success, fearing to find them. They were nowhere in the house, nor about the moonlit lawn, for although the sun is lost to us forever, the moon, full-orbed or slender, remains to us. Sometimes it shines by night, sometimes by day, but always it rises and sets, as in that other life. I left the lawn and moved in the white light and silence along the road, aimless and souring. Suddenly I heard the voice of my poor husband and exclamations of astonishment, with that of my son in reassurance and dissuasion. And there by the shadow of a group of trees they stood, near, so near. Their faces were toward me, the eyes of the elder man fixed upon mine. He saw me at last. At last he saw me. In the consciousness of that, my terror fled as a cruel dream. The death spell was broken. Love had conquered law. Mad with exultation, I shouted. I must have shouted. He sees, he sees. He will understand. Then, controlling myself, I moved forward, smiling and consciously beautiful, to offer myself to his arms, to comfort him with my endearments, and, with my son's hand in mine, to speak words that should restore the broken bonds between the living and the dead. But alas, alas, his face went white with fear. His eyes were those of a hunted animal. He backed away from me as I advanced, and at last turned and fled into the wood, whither it is not given to me to know. To my poor boy, left doubly desolate, I have never been able to impart a sense of my presence. Soon he too must pass to this life, invisible, and be lost to me forever.
Today I am said to live. Tomorrow, here in this room, will lie a senseless shape of my clay that all too long was I. If anyone lift the cloth from the face of that unpleasant thing, it will be in gratification of a mere morbid curiosity. Some, doubtless, will go further and inquire, who was he? In this writing, I supply the only answer that I am able to make. Caspar Groton. Surely that should be enough. The name has served my small need for more than 20 years of a life unknown length. True, I gave it to myself, but lacking another, I had the right. In this world, one must have a name. It prevents confusion, even when it does not establish identity. Some, though, are known by numbers, which also seem inadequate distinctions. One day, for illustration, I was passing along a street of a city far from here when I met two men in uniform, one of whom, half pausing and looking curiously into my face, said to his companion, "That man looks like 767. Something in the number seemed familiar and horrible. Moved by an uncontrollable impulse, I sprang into a side street and ran until I felt exhausted in a country lane. I have never forgotten that number, and always it comes to my memory attended by gibbering obscenity, peals of joyless laughter, the clang of iron doors. So I say a name, even if self-bestowed, is better than a number. In the register of the potter's field, I shall soon have both. What wealth! Of him who shall find this paper, I must beg a little consideration. It is not the history of my life. The knowledge to write, that is denied me. This is only a record of broken and apparently unrelated memories, some of them as distinct and sequent as brilliant beads upon a thread, others remote and strange, having the character of crimson dreams and interspaces blank and black, witch fires glowing still and red in a great desolation. Standing upon the shore of eternity, I turn for a last look backward, long landward and over the course by which I came. There are 20 years of footprints, fairly distinct, the impressions of bleeding feet. They lead through poverty and pain, devious and unsure, as of one staggering beneath a burden, remote, unfriended, melancholy, slow. Ah, the poet's prophecy of me, how admirable, how dreadfully admirable. Backward beyond the beginning of this Via Dolorosa, this epic of suffering with episodes of sin, I see nothing clearly. It comes out of a cloud. I know that it spans only 20 years, yet I am an old man. One does not remember one's birth. One has to be told. But with me, it's different. Life came to me full-handed and dowered me with all my faculties and powers. Of a previous existence, I know no more than others, for all have stammering intimations that may be memories and may be dreams. I know only that my first consciousness was of maturity in body and mind, a consciousness accepted without surprise or conjecture. I merely found myself walking in a forest, half-clad, footsore, unutterably weary and hungry. Seeing a farmhouse, I approached and asked for food, which was given me by one who inquired my name. I did not know, yet knew that all had names. Greatly embarrassed, I retreated, and night coming on, lay down in the forest and slept. The next day I entered a large town which I shall not name, nor shall I recount further incidents of the life that is now to end. A life of wandering, always and everywhere, haunted by an overmastering sense of crime in punishment of wrong, and of terror in punishment of crime. Let me see if I can reduce it to a narrative. I seem once to have lived near a great city, a prosperous planter, married to a woman whom I loved and distrusted. We had, it sometimes seems, one child, a youth of brilliant parts and promise. He is at all times a vague figure, never clearly shown or drawn, frequently altogether out of the picture. One luckless evening it occurred to me to test my wife's fidelity in a vulgar, a commonplace way, familiar to everyone who has acquaintance with the literature of fact and fiction. I went to the city, telling my wife that I should be absent until the following afternoon. But I returned before daybreak, went into the rear of the house, purposing to enter by a door with which I had secretly so tampered that it would seem to lock, yet not actually fasten. As I approached it, I heard it gently open and close, and saw a man steal away into the darkness. With murder in my heart, I sprang after him, but he had vanished without even the bad luck of identification. Sometimes now I cannot even persuade myself that it was a human being. Crazed with jealousy and rage, blind and bestial with all the elemental passions of insulted manhood, I entered the house and sprang up the stairs to the door of my wife's chamber. It was closed, but having tampered with its lock also, I easily entered, and despite the black darkness, soon stood by the side of her bed. My groping hands told me that, although disarranged, it was unoccupied. She is below, I thought, and, terrified by my entrance, has evaded me in the darkness of the hall. With the purpose of seeking her, I turned to leave the room, but took a wrong direction. The right one. My foot struck her, cowering in a corner of the room. Instantly, my hands were at her throat, stifling a shriek. My knees were upon her struggling body, and there in the darkness, without a word of accusation or reproach, I strangled her till she died. There ends the dream. I have related it in the past tense, but the present would be the fitter form, for again and again the somber tragedy reenacts itself in my consciousness. Over and over I lay the plan, I suffer the confirmation, I redress the wrong, then all is blank. And afterward the rains beat against the grimy window panes, or the snows fall upon my scant attire. The wheels rattle in the squalid streets where my life lies in poverty and mean employment. If there is ever sunshine, I do not recall it. If there are birds, they do not sing. There is another dream. Another vision of the night. I stand among the shadows in a moonlit road. I'm aware of another presence, but whose I cannot rightly determine. In the shadow of a great dwelling, I catch the gleam of white garments. Then the figure of a woman confronts me in the road. My murdered wife! There's death in the face. There are marks upon the throat. The eyes are fixed on mine with an infinite gravity which is not reproach, not hate, nor menace, nor anything less terrible than recognition. Before this awful apparition, I retreat in terror, a terror that is upon me as I write. I can no longer rightly shape the words. See, I mean, now I am calm. But truly, there is no more to tell. The incident ends where it began, in darkness and in doubt. Yes, I am again in control of myself, the captain of my soul. But that is not respite. It is another stage and phase of expiation. My penance, constant in degree, is mutable in kind. One of its variants is tranquility. After all, it is only a life sentence. To hell for life. That is a foolish penalty. The culprit chooses the duration of his punishment. Today, my term expires. To each and all, the peace that was not mine.
And that concludes our evening of Tales to Chill the Soul. Please join me in thanking our talented performers for their efforts. Lori Crum, Will Newman, and John Ward. I'm Kevin Simmons, and on behalf of Sherburne Music Theater Society, I want to thank you for coming here this evening, and I wish you all safe journeys along whatever darkened path or your journey takes you.
Oh, no.
Thank you.
Not tonight, eh?
That's right.